Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Julie and I mostly make content surrounding topics such as music, makeup, as well as mental health. Today's video is part of my Let's Get Clinical series in which I educate the world about various mental health conditions in regard to their symptoms, prevalence, as well as treatment options. For today's video, we are going to be exploring an anxiety disorder, and it is pretty common and well known. It is social anxiety disorder. Social anxiety disorder is also often referred to now in the DSM as social phobia. If you're not familiar with the DSM, if you haven't watched one of my videos from Let's Get Clinical before, here it is. Here's the book. It is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It was published in 2013. So we may need some updates. However, the information I'll be providing you with today, I found all in the handy dandy DSM, with the exception of treatment options because the DSM does not delineate those and I have to go in and do separate research. But let's get into it. According to the diagnostic criteria delineated in the DSM, we have a few requirements that an individual must meet in order to receive a proper diagnosis of social anxiety disorder. Criteria A has to do with marked fear or anxiety about one or more social situations in which the individual is exposed to public scrutiny by others. Examples of this may include social interactions, such as having a conversation or meeting new people, being observed, whether that's someone eating or drinking, or it could be performing in front of others, such as giving a speech. An important note for mental health providers is if you're going to diagnose social anxiety disorder in a child, they must experience social anxiety amongst their peers and not solely around adults to receive proper diagnosis. Moving to criteria B, the individual fears that they will act in a way or show anxiety symptoms that will be negatively evaluated. Criteria C, the social situations almost always provoke fear or anxiety. Now, specifically for children, they make a note that the fear or anxiety may be expressed by crying, tantrums, freezing, clinging, shrinking, or failing to speak in these social situations. Criteria D entails that the social situations are avoided or endured with intense fear or anxiety. Criteria C says the fear or anxiety is out of proportion to the actual threat posed by the social situation and in regards to sociocultural context as well. Criteria F states the fear, anxiety, or avoidance is persistent, typically lasting 6 months or more in duration. Criteria G, the fear, anxiety, or avoidance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. If you've watched my series before, that is almost always a requirement to diagnose any mental health condition. So they are saying this individual must struggle in some area of their life. It's not just they have some symptoms. It makes school hard, it makes work hard, it makes home hard. It has to make some environment very distressing and difficult in order for this individual to receive the diagnosis. Criteria H says the fear, anxiety, or avoidance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance, such as a drug the individual is abusing or a medication, or this may be related to a medical condition. Criteria I states the fear, anxiety, or avoidance is not better explained by the symptoms of another mental disorder, such as panic disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, or autism spectrum disorder. Now, some individuals may have these mental health conditions and also qualify for a social anxiety diagnosis. So this is up to the provider. However, it is important to rule these conditions out because an individual with body dysmorphic disorder, for example, is going to feel very self-conscious about an area of their body, and that may lead to some fear and avoidance behaviors. But does it have to do with social situations, or does it only have to do with a bodily concern? You see what I'm saying? Moving forward to the final criteria, criteria J states, if another medical condition, such as Parkinson's disease, obesity, or disfigurement from burns or injury are present, then the fear, anxiety, or avoidance are clearly unrelated or excessive. So what they're saying here is you don't need to say, okay, this person has this medical condition so they cannot have social anxiety. You have to make sure the social anxiety isn't coming from solely one of these factors, whether it's that this person is clinically obese and we have a stupid fat phobic society that we need to fix, but is this individual truly afraid of negative evaluation in a social situation for other reasons than that? Moving forward, there's a specifier for this diagnosis because an individual can be diagnosed with social anxiety disorder where it is performance only. That means that if the fear is restricted solely to speaking or performing in public. Now, if this wasn't something that came up often for an individual, they probably wouldn't receive this diagnosis because it wouldn't significantly impact their life. But if you were a dancer or an athlete or something of that sort, it absolutely would. We're chugging along here. We're moving forward to the diagnostic features section of the DSM. This just gives us some more specific information about the previous symptoms that I described. In children, the fear or anxiety within social anxiety must occur in peer settings and not only with adults. I know I said this previously, but it's just important to reiterate that for diagnosis. Also, the fear of offending others by gaze or showing anxiety symptoms may be the predominant fear of individuals from collectivist cultures. I love this, and I felt it was so important to include because we really need to take culture into consideration when making a diagnosis to say, is this behavior something that's cultural and is appropriate to that culture for this individual? Because then we need to respect it, and their diagnosis may be entirely different. So criterion A was explained in more detail here, where adults experience specific symptoms such as fear of judgments, such as being judged as anxious, weak, crazy, stupid, boring, intimidating, dirty, or even unlikable. Whew, I relate. Criterion C says that the social anxiety must be persistent. It must impact the individual's life and occur throughout all different social situations. However, this section makes sure to remind providers that the individual may have varied severity levels in their anxiety. So they may have anticipatory anxiety about an event where they're rapidly planning for it months in advance versus experiencing an actual panic attack, which would be a more severe form of anxiety. It is still valid and is still persistent, but the severity may shift depending on the situation or the individual. Within Criterion D, which pertain to avoidance of these feared social situations, the avoidance may take form either extensively or in a more subtle fashion. So an extensive form of avoidance would just be an individual avoiding a party, not going to a party, or a child refusing to go to school, which is very common if they experience social anxiety. Whereas someone may over-prepare for a speech, or they may limit their eye contact, and these are more subtle avoidance behaviors, but they're important to acknowledge here. Beyond this, again, going back to culture, it's important for providers to take sociocultural context into consideration, as some social anxiety behaviors may be normal for their culture, such as a behavior may be a sign of respect, right? We have certain cultures where we avoid eye contact, not because we're nervous, but to respect the other individual. In regard to Criterion C, which has to do with the fear being out of proportion to the actual social event, if the fear of the situation is rational, such as an individual could be bullied or tormented by others, then they would not qualify for this diagnosis. It's up to the provider to evaluate whether the individual's fear is out of proportion to the upcoming social encounter. Our next section is the associated features supporting diagnosis. So we have some more specific information about social anxiety disorder here, such as individuals with social anxiety disorder may be inadequately assertive or excessively submissive, or less commonly, they may be highly controlling of the conversation. I have definitely seen that before, so I'm glad it's listed here because social anxiety is not just shy people, but we'll get into that. Also, an individual with social anxiety may have an overly rigid body posture, or inadequate eye contact, or they may even have a soft voice. They could be shy or withdrawn, and self-medication is often common for this population, especially in regard to drinking before going to a party. The hallmark symptom of social anxiety disorder is blushing in particular. So now that we've covered social anxiety disorder in huge depth, I think we've really done a good job here. We are moving forward into prevalence rates, which are pretty straightforward. So according to the DSM, the 12-month prevalence estimate for social anxiety in the United States is 7%, which is a similar rate to the onset of it for children and adolescents. However, prevalence rates tend to decrease with age. In regard to the development and course of social anxiety disorder, the median age of onset for it is typically 13 years old, and 75% of individuals with this condition experience onset at ages between 8 to 15 years old. The onset of social anxiety disorder may occur after a stressful life event or humiliating experience, such as being bullied or vomiting during a public speech. Oh, that poor person. However, it can be more insidious, and social anxiety can develop in someone at a slower rate. It doesn't always have to be a stressful event of these sorts. In older adults, social anxiety could be related to declines in sensory functioning, embarrassment about one's appearance, such as if someone had Parkinson's disease and shook a lot, or even functioning due to a medical condition where as someone ages, they start to forget things and they forget people's names. This makes so much sense. That would definitely make a conversation uncomfortable. Moving forward into risk and prognosis, behavioral inhibition, as well as fear of negative evaluation, are temperamental underlying traits. Now, environmentally, childhood maltreatment and adversity can be risk factors for developing social anxiety disorder. However, that is not always the case. That behavioral inhibition that is applied to our temperament, it has a high genetic component, so it is considered to be genetically predisposed by some. And also in regard to genetics, first-degree relatives are 2 to 6 times more likely to develop social anxiety than someone else. We do have some gender-related diagnostic issues delineated in the DSM as well, such as females with social anxiety report a greater number of social fears, as well as comorbid depressive, bipolar, or anxiety disorders, whereas males are more likely to fear dating and experience oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, and they are also more likely to use alcohol or illicit drugs to relieve their symptoms. In regard to comorbidities, as I previously said, for females, we have the comorbid depressive, bipolar, and anxiety disorders. In general, regardless of gender, common comorbidities along with social anxiety disorder include depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, as well as substance use disorders. It's also important to mention that having social anxiety is not the same as being shy. Normative shyness is classified as a personality trait, and it can actually be a strength and isn't worrisome to providers in general if it doesn't impact someone's functioning or cause significant distress for them emotionally. And statistically speaking, only 12% of self-identified shy people in the United States actually experience symptoms related to social anxiety. All right, y'all, you ready? We have this final portion here, and it is one of the most important pieces that I add to all these videos. It entails treatment options. So I found this information from the ADAA. According to the ADAA, there are 2 well-known evidence-based treatments for social anxiety disorder. The first is CBT, which is just an evidence-based gold standard treatment for many mental health conditions, depressive and anxiety disorders alike. In regard to treating social anxiety disorder with CBT, CBT will typically consist of psychoeducation about social anxiety disorder, so teaching the individual what this condition entails for them so that they can work on it. If it is a child or adolescent, this psychoeducation would extend to the family as well so that everyone can be on the same page. After that, the individual would engage in cognitive restructuring techniques, which are the pinnacle of CBT itself. We have thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and we even have bodily sensations over here, and they are all interrelated and all impact each other. Many of us who have mental health conditions have a lot of negative evaluations about ourselves, and CBT can help us to challenge those and, in a sense, reframe the way we perceive ourselves in even outside events and factors. Individuals are also encouraged to do exposure. Y'all have seen me do agoraphobia adventures before. That is a different type of exposure. This would be exposure to a feared stimuli. So for someone with social anxiety, it would most likely be a social situation, or if they had the performance anxiety, it would be giving a speech, and the provider would engage in cognitive restructuring techniques with the individual prior to the event and also afterward. It's also important because for many individuals with social anxiety, they tend to turn inward in social situations and focus on their own internal monologue, if they have one. And providers are encouraged to guide individuals to instead focus on the external stimuli in their environment, the conversation, the actual environment itself, whatever it may be, and that takes some of the focus off of them. Specifically, research says there is a CBT-based program that holds efficacy for children ages 6 to 14 years old that merges CBT skills with social skills training. It is referred to as SET C. Beyond psychotherapy interventions, we have medications that hold some efficacy for individuals with social anxiety disorder as well. For adults in particular, SSRIs or SNRIs are good treatment options. For children, SSRIs in particular hold a higher efficacy than SNRIs. However, it's important to note the data that supports this comes from studies that analyze the efficacy of these medications for children and adolescents with various anxiety disorders, such as a generalized anxiety disorder as well as separation anxiety disorder. Outside of these two major options, that being psychotherapy using CBT strategies specific to social anxiety disorder treatment and medication through SNRIs or SSRIs, there has been some success to other treatment options, but currently there is less efficacy that has been shown on these, and more research would need to be conducted in the future. These options include interpersonal therapy, social skills training, ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, as well as relaxation training. And that's all I have for you today. We made it through. I hope this video was informative and helpful for you. It was fun for me to go through and do the research because, surprise, I have social anxiety. It's clinically diagnosed. Yes, I live with it every day of my life, and I have since I was a kid, and it's hard. So I'm glad that I could provide this psycho ed for you despite feeling nervous and socially anxious the whole time. Hey! So feel the fear and do it anyway. That's what I'm leaving you with today. Easier said than done, but if you can push yourself to do a thing, I'm proud of you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel as well. You can follow me on my social medias. My Instagram will be down below. My Instagram is Julie_counseling. My Facebook page will be linked down below in the description box as well. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye, all.